Rain lashed against the grimy pavement, the relentless downpour turning the city streets into rivers of icy water. The night was dark, with only the occasional flicker of streetlights piercing through the heavy curtain of rain. The sound of the rain was deafening, a constant roar that drowned out all other noises. Each drop exploded into a miniature geyser of icy water, creating a mesmerizing dance of splashes and ripples. The ground was a chaotic canvas of water, each splash adding to the symphony of the storm. The rain seemed to have a life of its own, each drop a tiny, powerful force. Sarah huddled deeper into her thin jacket, shivering uncontrollably. The cold seeped through the fabric, chilling her to the bone. She glanced around, her eyes searching for any sign of her ride. The rain had soaked her completely, her hair plastered to her face, her clothes clinging to her skin. Her phone buzzed. Uber arriving in 2 minutes. She fumbled with the device, her fingers numb from the cold. The screen was slick with rain, making it difficult to read the notification, but the message was clear, and it brought a glimmer of hope. A wave of relief washed over her. She allowed herself a small smile, the first in what felt like hours. The thought of a warm car, a dry seat, and a brief respite from the storm was almost too good to be true. She could hardly wait. Getting out of this storm was all that mattered. The rain was relentless, each drop a tiny hammer pounding against her. She felt like she was drowning, the water soaking through her clothes, her shoes, her very soul. She needed to escape, to find shelter, to be warm again. Across the street a lone streetlight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The light was weak, barely cutting through the darkness, but it was a beacon in the storm. The shadows it cast were eerie, moving and shifting with the wind and rain, creating a ghostly dance on the wet pavement. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping her hair across her face. It was a fierce, biting wind, adding to the misery of the rain. She tried to shield her face, but it was no use. The wind was too strong, the rain too heavy. She was at the mercy of the storm. A clap of thunder, sudden and violent, made her jump. The sound was like a cannon blast, echoing through the empty streets. Lightning followed, illuminating the night for a brief, blinding moment. The storm was a living thing, wild and untamed, and she was caught in its fury. The Uber app pinged, "Your ride is here." She looked up, squinting through the rain, and saw the car approaching. Relief flooded her once more. She stepped forward, eager to leave the storm behind. The car was her sanctuary, her escape from the relentless downpour. A pair of headlights cut through the deluge, momentarily blinding her. The car, a sleek black sedan she couldn't place the make of, pulled up. It idled, an ominous presence against the backdrop of the storm. Water cascaded off its roof like a miniature waterfall. Hesitantly, Sarah approached. The car felt wrong somehow, cold, unwelcoming, but the storm raged on, and the warmth of home beckoned. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, she opened the back door. The interior was surprisingly warm, almost too warm. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else she couldn't quite place. A voice, low and gravelly, startled her. "Good evening." It seemed to emanate from the driver, but his face remained shrouded in shadow. "Evening," she mumbled, sinking into the plush leather seat. The driver didn't move. He simply sat there, a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the dashboard. His silence was unnerving. "Just to, Elm Street, please. Elm Street." The car lurched forward, tires spitting water. They drove in silence, the only sound the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Sarah tried to focus on her phone, but a strange unease settled over her. The route seemed unfamiliar, a maze of dark, deserted streets she didn't recognize. Excuse me," she stammered. "I think you might be going the wrong way." The driver didn't respond. He just kept driving, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Her heart began to pound against her ribs. The rain intensified, pounding against the roof of the car like 1,000 tiny fists. Each drop seemed to echo the turmoil within Sarah's mind, a relentless barrage of thoughts and fears. She had always loved the rain, finding comfort in its rhythmic patter. But tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt like a warning, a harbinger of something ominous lurking in the shadows. The wind howled outside, a mournful, almost human sound. It whipped through the trees, bending their branches and sending leaves swirling into the night. The sound was unsettling, like the wails of lost souls searching for peace. Sarah shivered, pulling her coat tighter around her. The wind seemed to carry voices, whispers that she couldn't quite make out but felt deep in her bones. Sarah could have sworn she heard whispers, faint and indistinct, carried on the wind. They were just on the edge of her hearing, tantalizingly close, yet frustratingly elusive. She strained to listen, her heart pounding in her chest. Were they real or just a figment of her imagination? The uncertainty gnawed at her, adding to her growing sense of unease. She pressed her hand against the window, feeling its icy chill against her palm. The cold seeped into her skin, a stark contrast to the warmth of the car's interior. It was as if the outside world was trying to reach her, to pull her into its cold, dark embrace. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The air grew colder, the scent of wet earth stronger. The fog thickened, wrapping around the car like a shroud. It was hard to see more than a few feet ahead, the world beyond the windshield a murky, indistinct blur. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, as if they were the only two people left in the world. Sarah's anxiety spiked, her mind racing with possibilities of what could be out there, hidden in the fog. She glanced at the driver, her blood turning to ice. His face was calm, almost too calm, as if he were completely unaffected by the storm raging outside. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her skin crawl. They were too bright, too intense, like they were seeing right through her. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She was trapped in his gaze, her fear growing with each passing second. His eyes, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, met hers in the rearview mirror. He wasn't human. She knew it instinctively, a primal part of her recognizing the danger, even if her rational mind couldn't comprehend it. The glow was mesmerizing, drawing her in even as every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to get away from this creature that wore a human face. She knew it with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. This was no ordinary night, and he was no ordinary man. The whispers, the rain, the wind, they were all part of something much larger, something she couldn't yet understand. But she knew one thing for sure. She had to get out of that car, and fast. Her life depended on it. Terror lent her a sudden burst of strength. She fumbled for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "Let me out!" she screamed, her voice high-pitched and desperate. The driver chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down her spine. He turned, his face finally illuminated by a flash of lightning. It wasn't a face she could comprehend. Pale, gaunt, with eyes that burned like hot coals, his mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. He wasn't human, he was something else entirely. The world dissolved into a dizzying kaleidoscope of colors and shapes. The car, the storm, the creature beside her all faded into nothingness. She was falling, tumbling through an endless void, the screams dying in her throat. Then, just as suddenly, she was back. She lay sprawled on the cold, wet pavement, her body racked with tremors. The storm had passed, leaving behind a night sky shimmering with stars. Across the streetlight flickered back to life, casting long, dancing shadows. It had all been a dream, a nightmare. Relief washed over her, leaving her weak and shaken. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling beneath her. Her phone lay on the ground beside her, its screen cracked. She picked it up, her hand shaking. The Uber app was still open, but the driver's profile picture was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of colors. and the name beneath it sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through her. It simply read unknown. It hadn't been a dream. A cold wind swept down the street, carrying with it the faint scent of wet earth. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, wavering shadows that danced on the wet pavement. The air was thick with an unsettling stillness, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant hum of a passing car. It was the kind of night that made you feel like you were being watched even when you were alone, and something else, something dark and sinister. She was not alone. The feeling of being watched was palpable, as if unseen eyes were tracking her every move. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing loudly in the empty street. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more menacing, as if they were closing in on her. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps, and she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had to keep moving, but the fear was paralyzing. She whirled around, her heart pounding in her chest. But there was nothing there. The street was empty, devoid of any signs of life. The silence was deafening, amplifying her fear. She stood there for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She knew she couldn't stay there. She had to keep moving. She turned back around and started walking again, her eyes darting around, searching for any sign of danger. Only the echo of the wind, whispering her name. It was a haunting sound, like a ghostly voice calling out to her from the darkness. She tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. The whispers seemed to grow louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to tell her something. She quickened her pace, her footsteps echoing loudly in the empty street. The wind picked up, swirling around her, making her feel even more isolated and vulnerable. In the distance, a pair of headlights pierced the darkness, slowly approaching. She felt a glimmer of hope, thinking that maybe, just maybe, it was someone who could help her. The headlights grew brighter, cutting through the thick darkness like a beacon. She stood there, frozen, watching as the car got closer and closer. Her heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. She didn't know whether to run or stay put. A sleek black car, its silhouette ominously familiar, emerged from the shadows. It was the same car she had seen before, the one that had haunted her nightmares. The car moved slowly, almost menacingly, as if it was stalking her. She felt a chill run down her spine as she realized that there was no escape. The car was here for her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The car that was to be her salvation. She had once thought that this car would save her, that it would take her away from the darkness and the fear. But now, as it approached, she realized that it was not her salvation. It was something far more sinister. The car came to a stop in front of her, and she felt a sense of dread wash over her. She knew that whatever was inside that car was not here to help her. The car that became her nightmare. The door slowly creaked open, and she could see a shadowy figure inside. Her heart pounded in her chest as she took a step back, her mind racing with fear. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to get away, but she was frozen in place. The figure stepped out of the car, and she could see the glint of something metallic in its hand. She knew that this was the end, and it was coming for her again. The nightmare was far from over. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, suffocating her. The car, the figure,